I remember the light. That's what they called it. The light, a sacred thing, a holy thing, a place where nothing unclean could survive, where the righteous walked and the wicked were cast out. The church had white walls, so white they burned your eyes when the sun hit them. The men wore pressed shirts and shiny shoes, and the women kept their hair long and their mouths shut. They called themselves the Brothers of Light, but their hands knew nothing of light. I was 8 when they first touched me. My parents had brought us to the congregation after moving into a small, quiet town on the edge of nowhere. There wasn't much else around. No school bus, no library, no playgrounds, just fields and silence and the church at the top of the hill. They said the brothers were kind. They said they watched over the children. They said they walked with God, and so I trusted them. They smiled so gently, spoke so softly, with their soft eyes and softer voices, always quoting scripture, always saying God loves a pure heart, always reminding us that obedience is the first sign of faith. I was taught never to question them, never to frown, never to complain. My mother, God rest her soul, believed obedience was holiness. She told me often, God sees everything, even the bad thoughts, so you must stay clean inside and out. I tried. I really did. So when Brother Elias told me to stay after Sunday school, I did. He closed the door softly, kneeled in front of me, took my hands in his. You're special, he whispered. God has chosen you, but to stay in his light you must be tested. I remember nodding. I remember wanting to please him, to please God, to be good. I didn't understand what was happening when he touched me. Not then, not fully, but something in me recoiled. Something went silent, and something else screamed. He told me not to tell anyone. That this was sacred, that little girls with dirty mouths burned in hell. Then he kissed my forehead and sent me out into the blinding sun. My mother was waiting in the churchyard talking to another woman about canning peaches. When I reached her, I opened my mouth, trying to speak, trying to say something, but no words came. Just a strange heat in my chest and a pressure behind my eyes. She looked down, smoothed my hair, and said, "You've been crying. Was it the Holy Spirit? Isn't it beautiful to feel God so deeply?" I didn't speak. I nodded. She smiled. And we went home. It didn't stop. It never stopped. Sometimes it was Brother Elias. Sometimes Brother Michael. Sometimes one of the elders whose names I never learned, just soft voices and hard hands and quiet rooms. They passed me between them like communion. Each time they said something different. This is God's love. You're lucky to be chosen. Your purity is what draws him near. This is our secret. Just between us and God. And when I bled for the first time, not from my body changing, but from what they did to it, Brother Elias held me while I cried and said, "This is how we know you're clean inside. Only the clean bleed. You're blessed." I tried to tell my parents once. Just once. I was 9. I asked my mother, "Can God's love ever feel wrong?" She froze. Her hands, which had been peeling potatoes, stilled mid. She turned to me slowly and said, "You've been reading too many of those little thoughts in your head. Doubt is the enemy's whisper. We do not entertain it in this house." And that was that. No questions, no arms wrapped around me, no safety. I never asked again. Instead, I learned how to disappear while still sitting in the same room, how to make my face go blank while my body screamed inside, how to swallow entire oceans of terror and smile sweetly when asked if I was enjoying the sermon. I became very good at being good. They liked that. They called me pure. They praised my discipline. The women at church said they wished their daughters were more like me, and my mother, my poor, blind mother, beamed with pride. "God has his hand on her," she'd say. "She's so obedient, so still, so devout." But stillness is not devotion. Stillness is what happens when your soul has no more room to run. By the time I turned 11, I had stopped crying altogether. Tears, I learned, made them crueler. Tears made them whisper. You must enjoy it if you're crying. And tears meant you were weak, and weakness had no place in the light. So I hardened. I became what they wanted. Quiet, modest, expressionless. A porcelain version of a child, without questions, without noise, without rage. But inside, I began to rot, not in the way people think. No bitterness, no screaming hate, just a slow unraveling, a quiet emptiness that spread through me like frost. I lost time, sometimes hours, sometimes days. I'd wake in my bed not knowing how I got there. I'd walk through church halls with scraped knees and aching hips, but no memory of the hands that brought me there. And still, no one asked. No one saw, or worse, they did see, and they looked away, because the light is bright enough to blind, if you let it. And that's how they kept us in it, with shame, with silence, with the false holiness of suffering. They taught us to believe that pain was part of the path, that obedience was purity, that anything that happened under their roof was God's will, and we were the offerings. I remember the moment something in me finally cracked. I was 12. The summer air was thick with heat and flies, and the fields around the church buzzed with cicadas. They had called me in again, Brother Nathan this time. His smile was softer than the others, almost tender, almost apologetic, as though his cruelty came with regret. He told me to kneel, to pray with him. I did, I always did, but as his hand slid down my back, something inside me stood up. Not my body. It stayed still, obedient, motionless like always. Know something deeper, a voice I hadn't heard in years, a voice that didn't belong to any preacher, any scripture, any parent. It was mine, and it said, "This is not love." It said, "This is not God." It said, "You are allowed to leave." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I didn't even know what leave meant. I only knew how to disappear. So I disappeared again. But this time, I took that voice with me, tucked it deep, like a glowing coal hidden under ash. It would take years, decades, for it to burn bright enough to light a way out. But it stayed. It waited. It never left me. And in that waiting, I began to see. See how the women in the congregation looked away when a brother took a girl by the wrist. See how mothers silenced their daughters with a single glance. See how purity was just another word for silence. They knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not the rooms, the hands, the exact names, but they knew. And they chose the light anyway, because the light gave them status. The light gave them belonging. The light gave them a reason not to question what they themselves had endured. Some of those women had been girls like me, and when they grew, they buried it so deep they called it faith. But I refused. Even as a child, broken, small, voiceless, I refused to turn my pain into doctrine. I didn't have the words yet. I didn't have the strength, but I had rage. Silent, coiled rage that never showed on my face. They never saw it. They never knew. But it lived in me like a knot, the kind of weapon you hold in your hand. But the kind that lives in your voice, in your truth, in your refusal to be erased. I carried that rage through adolescence like a sacred secret. I stopped smiling when they expected me to, stopped flinching when their hands reached, stopped believing that obedience was salvation. And they noticed, not all at once, but slowly like animals sensing danger in the air. Brother Elias called me hardened. Brother Michael said I was straying from the path. Brother Nathan wept while warning me that rebellion was a sin, but I didn't care anymore. By 14, my heart was iron. Cold, sharp, unforgiving. I began to write at night quiet letters in a notebook I kept beneath the floorboard, not to anyone, just to myself, to the girl I used to be, to the one still kneeling, still bleeding, still believing she deserved it. I told her, "You were never dirty. You were never at fault. They twisted God into a cage, but you were never the prisoner." They were, and I swore to her in those pages that I would get out. And I did. Not in a blaze of confrontation, not in some dramatic escape. Just one slow, deliberate step at a time. I stopped going to Sunday school, then stopped going to youth group, then started refusing the closed doors, the private prayers, the extra attention. And when the brothers came to our house, when they asked my parents why I was withdrawing, when they said they were concerned about my soul, I watched my mother look them in the eyes and say, "She's just tired. Girls her age are moody." And I realized they would never protect me. Not her, not him, not anyone. I was alone, but I was awake. And once you're awake, you can't go back to sleep. So I stayed quiet. I finished school. I smiled when I had to. I played the part. But I was already gone inside. By 16, I was planning my escape. By 17, I left, with a small suitcase, a few dollars, and the notebook under my arm. They told me I would fall. They told me the world would break me. They told me I'd come crawling back. But I didn't. I never went back. I found work. I found friends. I found myself. It took years to stop flinching, years to sleep through the night, years to believe a hand on my shoulder didn't mean danger. But healing isn't a miracle, it's a decision. Over and over again. To breathe, to eat, to get up when your bones say stay down. And I made that decision every day, even now. Especially now, because I have daughters of my own and granddaughters, and they will never be told to be quiet, never be touched in the name of God, never be asked to smile through pain, not while I still breathe, not while I still breathe, because silence, once broken, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. It becomes a flood, and I became the storm that silence feared. It wasn't easy. God, it was never easy. There were nights I woke gasping, fists clenched, sweat pouring from my skin like poison. Nights when their voices echoed in my ears, sweet and cruel and scripture-laced. Nights when I still felt their hands even though I was miles and decades away. But I no longer begged to forget. I learned instead to remember without drowning. That was my freedom. To carry the memory like a scar not open, not bleeding, but visible. I stopped hiding it. Stopped pretending it didn't shape me. Because it did. But I am not shaped like a victim. I am shaped like survival. And I built my life brick by brick without their God, without their rules, without their hands on my soul. I found a different kind of faith, not in heaven, but in women, in the ones who sat with me in the dark without asking me to smile, in the ones who told their own stories like torn hymns turned into war cries, in the ones who said, "I believe you, without needing details, and slowly I became a woman again, not a vessel, not a sacrifice, not a silent offering, but a woman, whole, loud, angry, soft, real, and that woman married, not for rescue, but for choice. She bore children not to prove her worth, but because she had love to give. And when her daughters came crying in the night from monsters in their dreams, she held them close and whispered, "No monster will ever touch you while I'm alive." And she meant it, because the thing about surviving men who wear holiness like armor is that you learn to see them coming. You learn the signs, the gaze, the voice, the hunger wrapped in scripture, and I swore to God, my God, not theirs, that I would never let them near another child again. So when I saw the same signs in another town, in another congregation, years later, I didn't hesitate. I stood up in the middle of a sermon. I looked the preacher in the eye, and I told the truth, loud, clear, unashamed. I told them what had happened, named names, dates, faces, and the room went still. They called me bitter, called me broken, called me a liar, a Jezebel, a disgrace. But some of the women wept. Some of the girls stood taller, and some of the elders turned pale. And I knew I had torn a hole in the silence, one they would never fully stitch closed again. That was the moment I became dangerous. Not because I was angry, but because I had survived and I was speaking. They can't control women who speak. They can't erase what's been said out loud. They can't hide in the dark when someone brings the light. Real light. Not the light of their false purity, not the light they use to blind us, but the kind that exposes, that reveals, that cleanses. I have nothing left to hide. My shame was never mine to carry. My silence was never consent. My survival is not an apology. And now, when I sit with my granddaughters, small, wild things with loud voices and stubborn hearts, I tell them everything. I don't flinch. I don't protect them from the truth. I arm them with it, because the world is still full of men in clean suits and soft smiles, still full of false prophets, still full of darkness that calls itself light. But my girls will know the difference. And they will never bow their heads out of fear. Not while I'm still here. Not while I'm still here. Because I am the last woman in our bloodline who will carry this kind of silence. The last to be broken in secret and told to smile. The last to be praised for her obedience while being destroyed behind closed doors. I've made peace with many things in my life, poverty, grief, even betrayal. But I will never, never make peace with what was done to me. And I don't need to. Forgiveness is not a requirement for healing. Closure is not owed. Justice does not always come wrapped in law or confession or apology. Sometimes justice looks like a girl who knows she can say no. Sometimes it's a door that stays locked, a little hand that's never touched inappropriately, a voice that's never silenced. Sometimes justice is me, still breathing, still loud, still here. And now, when people ask me how I survived, how I lived through years of abuse under the mask of religion, how I managed to love again, laugh again, trust again, I tell them the truth. I didn't survive because I was strong. I survived because I had to, because no one came, because no one listened, because the only way out was through, and I walked through hell with bare feet and bruised knees and a heart full of rage I wasn't allowed to show. And somehow, I didn't burn up in it. I turned it into something else, into fire that warmed me instead of destroying me. That's what they never expected. They never expected me to grow up, to remember, to speak. They never thought their names would leave my mouth one day. Never imagined their sacred secrets would be pulled into the daylight. But that's the thing about secrets. They don't die with time. They don't fade. They fester until someone dares to speak. And I did, and I will keep speaking. Until my last breath, until my voice shakes from age, until my body gives in, but my truth remains standing. Because every time I speak, another girl hears herself in my story. Another woman exhales, another survivor steps out of the shadows and says, "Me too, I'm still here too." And that, to me, is holy. Not their twisted scriptures, not their blood-stained hymns, not their sanctified cruelty, but this fierce, unyielding solidarity, this sacred rage that binds us, this stubborn refusal to be erased. I'm not afraid of them anymore. Let them speak my name with bitterness. Let them deny, deflect, threaten, preach. I have nothing to lose. They already took what they could, and I took it back. Not with vengeance, not with violence, but with the one thing they never expected from a quiet little girl, truth. And now, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see what they tried to leave behind. I see a woman who endured, who reclaimed every inch of her voice, her skin, her story, who turned trauma into testimony, who stands not despite her past, but because of it. I see a warrior in a grandmother's body, and I smile, not because I'm healed, but because I'm free. And freedom, my love, is the loudest prayer I've ever known. And freedom, once found, becomes sacred. It becomes your altar, not one of stained glass and false prophets, but one made of truth and ash and breath and bone, built by your own hands for no one's worship but your own. And that's what I live in now. This life not perfect, not untouched, but mine. A life no longer shaped by what was done to me, but by what I dared to become despite it. There were years I thought I would never reach this place. Years when the weight of memory sat so heavy on my chest, I thought I'd never stand up straight again. When I couldn't speak without trembling, when I couldn't close my eyes without seeing their faces, when the word God made my stomach clench in revolt. But I walked through all of that. One unsteady step at a time, I walked through shame, through silence, through self-loathing, through the ache of being disbelieved, through the hollow echo of "you're exaggerating," through the pity in strangers' eyes and the disappointment in my family's. They wanted a good girl, they got a woman instead, one who does not flinch, one who does not bow, one who will not rewrite her story just to make them comfortable. There's power in that, not the kind they taught us to fear, the loud, messy, unstoppable kind, the kind that cannot be sanctified or silenced. And now I pass it on, not in sermons, not in rules, but in whispers, in glances, in the quiet way I hold my granddaughter's hands and remind them, your body is yours, your voice is yours, your no is sacred, your story is never too much. They look at me with wide eyes, not quite understanding, but sensing the fire beneath my words. I don't need them to understand yet. I just need them to never forget. Never forget the women who came before them, who burned and bled and broke in silence, who screamed into pillows and called it prayer, who swallowed whole oceans of pain and called it grace, who died with secrets still buried under lace and hymns and Sunday dresses. I am their echo, I am their answer, I am their reckoning. And when I go, when this body finally rests, they will not bury me as a woman who kept quiet. They will bury me as the one who spoke, the one who named things, the one who survived and made surviving holy. There will be no shame carved into my stone. Only this, she told the truth, and she set us free, and maybe that's the most sacred legacy of all. Not a name written in books, not medals or honors, but a lineage of girls who were never asked to shrink. Girls who never had to learn the taste of silence too early. Girls who do not mistake obedience for safety. I didn't grow up dreaming I would be anyone's savior. I didn't want to be a symbol. All I ever wanted was to be safe, to be seen, to be held without harm. But that was stolen from me over and over again by men who called themselves holy, by mothers who looked away, by a church that confused control with faith, by a system that taught me to fold in on myself just to survive. And now I look back not with forgiveness but with clarity. I see it all, every small betrayal, every willful blind eye, every moment when someone could have said, "Stop, that's enough," and instead chose quiet. But I also see her, the girl I was, still standing. They did not destroy her. They did not silence her. She waited, quiet and patient and furious, until I was strong enough to hear her again. And when I finally listened, I didn't tell her to forget. I said, "Tell me everything." And she did, in the stillness of night, in the trembling of my hands, in the dreams that made me wake gasping, in the way I flinched when someone said, "You were always such a good girl." She told me what I already knew, but was too afraid to name, that they lied, that their hands were not love, that God was never in those rooms. And with every word she gave back to me, I wrote it down, carved it into memory, turned it into fire, and let it burn clean. That's how I rebuilt myself, not by forgetting, but by remembering everything and loving myself anyway. Even the parts that shook, even the parts that froze, even the parts that wanted to die. Especially those, because survival is not just a heartbeat, it's 1,000 choices made in secret, to breathe, to eat, to stay, to not scream when it would have been easier to. And those choices, they mattered. They matter still. Now, when I walk through the world, this old body of mine slowing down, my bones aching from years I carried more than I should have had to, I walk tall, not because I am proud of what happened, but because I'm not ashamed. And no one, not them, not the church, not the ones who stayed silent, can take that from me now. I speak because I can, because I must, because there are still girls walking into rooms they won't walk out of the same, because there are still mothers who are too afraid to ask questions, because there are still men being called righteous while they ruin lives. So I speak, louder than ever, and when they say, "Let the past stay in the past," I look them in the eye and say, "The past lives in our daughters. If we don't name it, it eats them alive. This voice, this truth, this story, it is not a burden. It is my revolution, and I will carry it until my last breath. And when that last breath comes, when my lungs grow too tired and my voice finally quiets, it will not be with fear. It will not be with regret, because I have already done what they prayed I would never do. I have unlearned obedience. I have unlearned shame. I have unlearned silence." They built a system on the backs of girls like me, girls who were taught to kneel, to smile through pain, to call it God, but I stood up, and that simple act, that refusal to bow, shook the very ground they walked on. I became the story they hoped would never be told. The name they hoped would disappear. The girl who turned into a woman, who turned into a storm. And I did not stop. I did not stop when they called me bitter, when they called me broken, when they called me possessed, unholy, wicked, vengeful, a liar. Because I had already been called worse by the very men who hurt me with clean hands and righteous mouths. I knew what truth sounded like, and it didn't sound like scripture twisted into control. It didn't sound like prayers whispered over wounds they caused. It didn't sound like forgiveness demanded before I'd even finished bleeding. Truth sounded like my own voice, rough, trembling, full of fire, and finally free. I want you to understand this. The most dangerous thing a wounded girl can do is survive long enough to tell her story. Because then the illusion breaks, the silence collapses, and suddenly every other quiet girl in the room hears herself in that voice. That's how systems fall, not with war, but with truth. And I've been telling the truth for a long time now. It has cost me almost everything: family, comfort, community, the illusion of belonging, but it gave me myself, and I would choose that again. And again, and again. I have no church anymore, no pastor, no pews, but I still have faith. Not in institutions, not in men, not in doctrine. I have faith in girls who survive, in women who speak, in voices that tremble and still keep talking, in bodies that have been violated and still get up and make breakfast, still laugh, still dance, still love. That is the kind of holiness I believe in now, and if there's anything I want the world to remember me for, it's not the pain. Not the names of the men who broke me, not the years lost in fear. No, let them remember this, that I lived, that I named the truth, that I loved fiercely, especially myself, that I gave the shame back to the ones who earned it, and that I left this world brighter than I found it, because I refused to leave the darkness untouched. And let that be my legacy, not purity, not obedience, but freedom. And if any girl, anywhere, ever finds this story and sees herself in it, let her know she's not alone. She's not broken, and she will never again have to walk through the fire in silence, not while my words still burn, and my words will burn long after I'm gone, because stories like mine don't die. They pass down like inheritance, quiet, fierce, and true, not written in wills or etched into gravestones, but carried in the marrow of daughters who know better than to keep quiet. That's the real legacy, not what I leave behind, but what I unchain. Every time I speak, a lie unravels. A silence cracks. A locked door creaks open, and somewhere a girl stands a little taller. Somewhere a mother starts to wonder. Somewhere a preacher pauses mid-sermon because the truth is harder to bury when it's already been named. I was supposed to be one of the quiet ones, the obedient ones, the ones who keep the peace by breaking themselves. But I chose a different kind of peace, the peace that comes from no longer carrying their secrets. The peace that comes from looking in the mirror and seeing myself, not the damage they left behind. The peace that comes from living a life on my terms, not one written by fear. And it was worth everything, every lonely night, every door slammed, every accusation thrown at me like a stone, every family gathering where I was the ghost in the room, every time I was called too much, because I am not too much. I am exactly enough. Enough to speak, enough to survive, enough to mother without passing down the poison, enough to laugh without guilt. Enough to take up space, enough to be loved, truly loved, by people who don't flinch when they hear the whole story. And I've learned something that took me nearly a lifetime to believe. I was never the shame. They were. I was never the sin. They committed it. I was never the one who needed to be forgiven. I needed to be believed, protected, held, and now I hold myself. With both hands, with all the gentleness the world never gave me, with all the strength I once thought I didn't have. It's strange how healing works. It doesn't come all at once. It's not a wave. It's 1,000 tiny decisions: to breathe, to stay, to speak, to not speak, to cry, to stop crying, to try again. And somewhere along the way, you realize you are no longer surviving. You are living, not just existing in the ruins, but planting something in them, growing. And that is the greatest defiance, that I could be torn apart and still come back to myself. Not clean, not untouched, but whole, in my own way, on my own terms, with no apologies, and no permission asked. So when I leave this life, whenever that day comes, I will not go quietly. I will go loudly, with every story told, with every truth uncovered, with every lie dismantled, with every girl I helped free simply by refusing to be silent, because I was never theirs, not then, not now, not ever again, and that is what they never expected, that the little girl they silenced would one day become a woman who couldn't be shut up. that the body they used like a secret would grow strong enough to carry generations, that the soul they tried to fracture would someday radiate truth like a siren's call, that the shame they placed on my shoulders would be returned, not quietly, not in pieces, but whole, thrown back at their feet like a verdict, because I was not born to be a victim. I was born to be a witness to what was done in the dark, a witness to what silence costs. A witness to the wreckage of faith when it's twisted into control, and a witness to the rebirth that follows. They tried to make me forget, tried to preach the memories out of me, tried to bless them away with oil and threats and empty prayers. But memory is not a curse, it is a compass, and it led me here, to a life not built by them, to a truth not owned by them, to a peace not found in their kind of forgiveness. Because here is what they don't tell you. Forgiveness is not a door you must walk through to heal. Sometimes healing is standing on the outside, locking the door behind you and setting the whole damn house on fire. That is what I did. That is what I still do. I burn what was false. I speak what was forbidden. I carry what they said was too heavy for a woman. And I do it all with my head high. Because I am not their version of healed, not quiet, not docile, not ever ready to let them off the hook. I am healed on my own terms. And those terms are loud. Those terms are raw. Those terms are mine. I have walked through every version of grief, the kind that hides, the kind that rages, the kind that sits in your stomach like iron and makes you doubt your own breath, but I kept walking. And now I am the kind of woman who reaches back, who says to the next girl, "Come, it's okay, I know the way. You don't have to explain, you don't have to prove anything, you don't even have to speak if you're not ready. Just sit beside me, feel the ground under your feet. No, you're not alone. We're never alone. Not anymore. We're a quiet army, millions strong, wearing no uniforms, carrying no flags, just stories, scars, and the audacity to still be here, to still love, to still laugh, to still rise over and over, no matter how many times they tried to push us under. That is our victory. Not that we forget, but that we remember and live anyway. Not that we never broke, but that we put ourselves back together. Not that we were untouched, but that we reclaimed every inch of our skin. And when my time comes, when my bones finally rest, I will not be buried under a name soaked in silence. I will be remembered by every word I said out loud, by every girl who no longer hides, by every truth that took root because I dared to plant it. Let that be the final chapter. Not a grave, but a garden, full of names once whispered, now spoken in full of stories once hidden, now sung like psalms, because I never wanted vengeance, I wanted light. And now I am the light, and now I am the light, not the blinding kind they used to cover their sins, not the cold fluorescence of shame and discipline, not the twisted glare of religion turned into control. No, I am the kind of light that reveals, that warms, that says, you are safe here. And it wasn't given to me. No brother of light placed it in my hands. No preacher blessed me with it. No family member passed it down. I forged it from pain, from silence, from the ashes of everything they tried to make me forget. And now I carry it everywhere I go. Into every room, into every story I tell, into every hand I hold. Sometimes younger women ask me if it ever goes away. The memories, the fear, the ache. I tell them no. It doesn't go away, but it changes. It becomes quieter, less sharp. It stops ruling you, stops defining you. You stop waking up afraid of what's behind you. You start walking forward, maybe limping, maybe slow, but with purpose, with power. You realize that healing is not forgetting. It's choosing to live fully with the remembering, to walk through life without tucking the past under your tongue, to speak it raw, imperfect, sometimes trembling, and still stand. Because that's what I am now, a woman who stands. Not because I was never knocked down, but because I got back up every single time. And each time I rose taller, not despite what happened, but because I refused to let it be the end of my story. They say there's strength in silence. That's what they told us. That good girls endure, that holy girls suffer with grace, that obedient girls never make a scene. But that was a lie. There is no strength in silence. There is only rot, decay, the slow death of everything you might have been. My strength came the day I screamed, the day I stopped praying for it to stop and started praying for a way out. And then, one step at a time, I took it. No one came to rescue me. There were no saviors, only me, and the voice inside that said, you deserve more than this. And now I live for that voice. I feed it, I water it, I protect it like it's the only thing in the world that ever told me the truth. Because maybe it is, and when I speak to girls now, to women who carry their own silence, I don't try to be wise, I don't give advice, I just sit beside them in their dark and say, I've been here too, you're not alone. And this is not where it ends. Because I've learned The way out is not above or beyond. It's through the grief, through the memory, through the screaming, through the silence, through the days when you feel nothing at all. That's the path. And I walked it. I walk it still, but I don't walk it in shame anymore. I walk it with grace, with rage, with honesty, with a voice that has never been more mine. And now, when I look back, not to mourn, not to relive, but to understand, I see a trail of girls like me, little ghosts, once quiet, once small, now rising like wildflowers through concrete. And I say to them, grow even here, especially here. This soil is yours now, because what they meant for ruin became the ground I rebuilt my life on. And I'll keep building. For me, for the girl I was, for every girl who still thinks it was her fault, until the day my hands are too tired and my breath too thin, I will keep building. And when that day comes, when my hands finally still and the breath leaves my chest, not in fear, not in pain, but in peace, I hope the world I leave behind is quieter, not because the truth has been silenced, but because it no longer needs to scream. Because we screamed enough, we bled enough, we carried the weight of their sins long enough, and now we're laying it down. Not forgetting, never that, but refusing to carry what was never ours in the first place. And I know that somewhere, long after I am gone, a girl will sit on the edge of her bed, holding a truth that feels too heavy, too shameful, too dangerous. She will shake, she will cry, she will wonder if it's safer to bury it. And then, maybe, she will remember me, not my name, not my face, but my voice, the rhythm of it. The way it did not flinch, the way it carved space for pain and still dared to call it holy. And maybe, just maybe, she will speak too. That is why I wrote, that is why I told, that is why I never stopped. Not for vengeance, not for justice, though I deserved it, but for her. For the girl who is still standing in the corner of a too-quiet room with trembling hands and a mouth full of silence. For the girl who is still looking for anyone to believe her. Let her know I do, even if no one else does, even if the whole world turns away, even if her truth makes people shift in their seats and close their eyes. Let her know she is not dirty, not broken, not crazy, not alone. Let her know that the men who hurt her are not holy, and that silence is not the price of survival. Let her know that this world, cruel as it can be, still holds space for her voice, that she can take her time, that she can rage, that she can laugh again. Let her know that she does not have to become a warrior. But if she does, there is armor in truth and power in softness, and no shame in the way she chooses to rise. Because not all of us were born fighters. Some of us were made that way, forged in silence, hardened by hands that should have held us gently, raised in houses that sang of peace while preaching fear. But we fought anyway, even when we didn't know it, even when our battles looked like simply waking up, taking a shower, going outside, looking someone in the eye, telling the truth. And those battles, they matter just as much as any war. Every whispered, "Me too." Every trembling confession, every time we say his name out loud, every time we let ourselves be angry, every time we stop apologizing for surviving, these are the revolutions they never prepared for, the ones that don't need guns, just memory, just voice, just truth. And if I have done anything in this life worth remembering, let it be this, that I took a story meant to kill me and turned it into a torch, that I lit the path for the next one, that I made the silence less comfortable, that I made the truth louder. And when my bones return to the earth, and the world forgets my name, let there still be echoes of my voice in every girl who decides that her story is hers to tell, not theirs, hers. And let those echoes never fade. Let them live in the spaces where silence once ruled, in church pews that once hid secrets behind hymns, in family homes where questions were met with cold stares, in courtrooms where power sat in suits, not justice, in the minds of girls who were taught to lower their eyes. Let my voice stay there, a quiet hum beneath every lie they try to repeat, a reminder that someone spoke, that someone lived, that someone saw everything and told it anyway. Because I refuse to be another nameless woman buried under someone else's guilt. I refuse to be remembered as fragile or pitied or tragic. No, I will be remembered as dangerous. Because the truth is dangerous, because memory is dangerous, because when we survive and then speak, we undo centuries of control. And we were never supposed to speak, never supposed to last. We were supposed to break and bow and disappear. But I didn't. And every day that I breathe is proof that they failed. They wanted me to grow quiet, to forget, to protect them with my silence. Instead, I became a mirror. I held up their names, their hands, their words, reflected them back in full light. No more shadows, no more confusion, just the truth, bare and unstoppable. They flinched when I said what they did. They called it exaggeration, fiction, bitterness. because the truth only feels like an attack when you're still clinging to the lie. But I let go of lies long ago. They were heavy, they were suffocating, they belonged to them. And now my arms are open. For every girl who comes after me, for every woman who carries what no one should have to, for every survivor who still doubts if she's allowed to be angry, you are. You're allowed to scream, to cry, to sleep in, to say no, to never forgive, to take your time. To tell your story in pieces or not at all. To call what happened what it was: abuse, assault, rape, violation, theft, not confusion, not misunderstanding, not something that got out of hand. No theft. They stole from us, but they don't get to keep it. We take it back. Our words, our names, our choices, our bodies. We take them back not with permission, but with certainty, because we are no longer asking, no longer waiting to be heard, no longer hoping they'll do the right thing. We are the right thing. We are the reckoning, the answer to their silence, the fire at the edge of their lies, and we don't need their belief to make our stories true. They were always true, even when no one listened, even when no one cared. They were true in the locked rooms, in the stolen nights, in the forced smiles, in the prayers that went unanswered, in the mirrors we couldn't bear to look into. They were always true, and now we say them out loud. Not because we owe anyone anything, but because we owe ourselves everything. And this truth, this long, hard, bloody truth, it does not break us. It builds us into something new, something louder, something unshakable. And if I leave nothing else behind, let it be this. A girl will one day open her mouth to tell her story, and she won't stutter. She won't second guess. She won't apologize, because women like me spoke first. Because I would not stay silent. Because the silence ends with me. Because the silence ends with me. It ends with my voice, weathered but unwavering. It ends with every breath I use, not to whisper, but to declare. It ends with truth that's no longer hidden in the seams of shame, but stitched into the very fabric of my life. Loud, raw, permanent. And don't you dare mistake this ending for closure. There is no ribbon to tie around this story, no pretty ending, no neat forgiveness that fits into someone else's comfort. This is not the kind of ending they show in films. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't restore what was taken. It doesn't make it all okay. But it does do something else. It reclaims my body, my voice, my future, and that is enough. That is more than enough. Because survival, when told in full, is not a sad story. It's a revolution. It's a refusal to let them win. To let them bury us in the dark they created. To let them write our stories for us, with their silences, their excuses, their false piety. No, I write mine now. Line by line, truth by truth, and I don't soften the edges anymore. Let it be sharp, let it cut, let it sting, because pain does not diminish the power of a story. It defines it, it gives it weight, it gives it purpose, and maybe someday someone will try to tell my story without the blood, without the tears, without the screaming. They'll want to make it palatable, inspiring, something people can consume and feel good about. But let me be clear, this is not for their inspiration, this is for her, the girl who thinks no one will ever believe her. The woman who has never spoken her truth aloud, the mother who carries guilt that was never hers, the survivor who still wonders if it was her fault. It's not, it never was, and it never will be. And for her, I leave behind more than words. I leave proof that survival is messy, that healing isn't linear, that anger is holy, that softness can grow from fire, that you don't need to be perfect to be worthy, you just need to be true to yourself, to your story, to the voice inside you that was buried but never extinguished. Because that voice, your voice, is the most dangerous thing you will ever possess. They feared mine. They tried to kill it. And when they couldn't, they called me names. They said I was bitter, unforgiving, unwell. But they were wrong. I am alive, and I'm clear. I know who I am. I know what happened. I know what they did. And I know what I will never allow again. This life, this body, this voice is mine now, and if the only thing I do with what remains of it is speak truth into the world until my last breath, then I will have lived a life louder and freer than they ever intended for me. Because the silence ends with me, and the light, the real light, it begins here, and that light fierce, unyielding, born not of innocence but of survival, will not dim with my absence. It will linger. In the stories I told, in the girls I reached, in the silence I shattered over and over again. It will glow in the eyes of every woman who no longer lowers her head. It will flicker in the breath of every survivor who chooses to stay. It will blaze in the heart of every daughter who learns her body is not a battleground, but a home. That is what I built. Not cathedrals, not palaces, but a path, a bridge, a truth strong enough to hold the weight of what we've carried. And I carried it all, the shame, the rage, the grief. The longing to go back and rewrite it all. But we don't get to go back, we go forward. And forward is enough. Because in that direction, beyond the ruins, beyond the silence, there is a version of me who never has to hide, who is not afraid of shadows, who walks into any room and knows she belongs there, who speaks, not to ask permission, but to take up space. That version of me lives now. here, in this body, in this voice, in these words. And I honor her every time I refuse to soften the story, every time I say exactly what happened, every time I remind the world that it wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't confusion, it wasn't God's will, it was abuse, and it had names and faces and hands that touched what was never theirs to touch. That's the truth, not neat, not pretty, but freeing. And I will not apologize for it. I will not rewrite it to make anyone more comfortable. I will not dilute it to protect the legacy of men who protected themselves at the expense of my innocence. Because here's the truth they never tell you. We don't owe anyone our silence. Not our families, not our churches, not our culture, not our abusers. We don't owe healing to those who caused the wound. We don't owe forgiveness to those who demanded it before they even confessed. We don't owe comfort to anyone who flinched at our truth. We owe only this to ourselves, to tell it, to live despite it, to name it, so that it cannot keep crawling into the next girl's life unchecked. And that's what I've done. That's what I will continue to do in every breath, in every story, until the very last of me is gone. And even then, especially then, may my words stay. Let them be found in forgotten journals, in old recordings, in daughters' hearts and granddaughters' fire. Let them echo through time like a warning and a blessing. You are not alone. You are not the shame. You are not broken beyond repair. You are the fire that outlived the storm. You are what they never saw coming. And if I am remembered for anything, not for what was done to me, but for what I became in spite of it, then that is enough, because I did not die when they tried to kill me, not with their hands, not with their silence, not with their prayers, not with their rules. I lived, and I told the truth, and in the end, that's all that matters, and in the end, that's all that matters, not the titles I never earned, not the roles I was expected to play, not the version of myself they tried to mold me into, small, obedient, untouched by anger, untouched by truth. No. What matters is that I chose myself, even when no one else did. Even when it cost me everything they said a woman should hold dear, their approval, their comfort, their illusion of purity. What matters is that I survived, and then I spoke. That I reached back for the girls behind me, the scared ones, the silenced ones, the ones with stories that sat like glass in their throats, and I said, "Here, I made space for you." That I made a home out of honesty. That I built altars out of ash. That I turned their violence into language they could never unhear. What matters is that I lived long enough to stop waiting for someone to rescue me and became my own salvation. I don't need a statue. I don't need a plaque. I don't need a legacy carved in stone. Let them say this, that when the world tried to break me, I broke open, not down. That when I was given silence, I made it echo. That when I was handed shame, I turned it into fire. And that in my final breath, I left behind not a wound, but a map. For every girl who thought she had to stay quiet to stay safe. Let them follow it. Let them rewrite what it means to be holy. Let them scream if they need to. Let them whisper if that's all they can manage. But let them never again believe that survival must come at the cost of truth. Because I am proof that it doesn't. I am proof that you can survive and tell. That you can be shattered and sacred. That you can be angry and whole. That you can be a woman with scars and still be soft enough to hold someone else's pain. I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become after. And if that is the last thing I leave in this world, then I leave it freely, fiercely, and without apology. You're not alone. You're not too much. You're not beyond healing. You are the story they tried to silence, and the reason they never will again.